Hey, Luke.
Hello, Nora.
How's it going? Welcome to Sandy Nora.
It's going. Thanks for having me on.
For people who don't know who you are or what Press Progress is, can you start off by introducing yourself and telling the world of Sandy Nora listeners what it is that you do and what Press Progress does?
Oh my goodness, such a difficult question right off the bat. Who am I? Yeah, so I'm Luke Lebrun. I'm the editor of Press Progress. I'm an investigative journalist. I personally do a lot of reporting on right wing politics in Canada, the far right, things like that. Also do a lot of reporting on federal politics as well. Press Progress. So we are a nonprofit news organization. We do a lot of investigative as well as kind of explanatory journalism, focused particularly on a number of issues that tend to be underreported, I guess, and don't get as much coverage from the bigger mainstream outlets. Or that's kind of the concept behind Press Progress. So we do a lot of reporting on things like social and economic inequality, labor reporting, big business. As I mentioned, the far right and right wing alternative media, things like that, as well as civic institutions and threats to democracy and so forth. So that's kind of what we do in a nutshell.
Right. And you're national, you've got journalists all over Canada. And one of the things that I think is really important, if people are listening that don't really know Press Progress, you folks have broken some pretty big stories over the last couple of years. Do you have any stories that stand out as things that you're particularly proud of?
You know what? After all these years, I've been doing this for about 13 years. So when you
Yeah.
ask me this, it all just kind of blurs together. So many stories over the years. Well, like one story I think that I'm personally most proud of is like in the first week or two of the pandemic, we did a story looking at. So I mean, basically, we were hearing about workers who were basically saying that in order to take time off because they thought they had COVID symptoms, they had to go to a doctor's office and get a sheet of paper to prove that they actually had a cough or like some sort of symptom that might be associated with COVID. As you can imagine, this is possibly the dumbest thing you could do is ask someone who might be symptomatic, ask them to go to a doctor's office and stand around with a bunch of other people who might be immunocompromised or themselves have COVID or something like that. So we started just calling up random Tim Hortons franchises around the country and talking to workers on the phone, just ordinary minimum wage workers who picked up the phone, and we basically found out that this was a pretty systemic issue, like across Tim Hortons franchises in Canada. So, anyways, as a result of our reporting, it created a large backlash against Tim Hortons. Doug Ford, the Conservative Premier of Ontario, actually banned employers from asking for doctor's notes as a indirect result of our reporting. I mean,
Mm.
I think he was trying to get out ahead of this before it became pretty troubling for him. But yeah, and then Tim Hortons, I think they claimed that they made like a $40 million fund for workers. I'm not sure if any workers actually received funds from it, but that's one example of a kind of story that we do that we're pretty proud of. I mean, we
Mhm.
also, sometimes we report on things that candidates for public office say during elections. And I guess as we're going to discuss, sometimes that leads to situations where legal trouble comes out as a result.
Yeah, it's hard to avoid it sometimes. Before we get too far into
Mhm.
the conversation, of course, you accept donations, right? How can people support Press Progress?
We do. So we do run on a nonprofit model. So we are, funded by reader donations, specifically for our legal challenges. And this isn't just for, lawsuits, but I mean, also for any kind of threat to our journalism. I mean, we, through covering the far right, sometimes have to deal with some pretty weird and, potentially, we sometimes deal with people who are like stalkers or people who
Mm.
are threatening us with violence. So we have a website called journalismdefense.ca where we are raising funds specifically for things like our paying our legal bills and for responding to those kinds of threats to our journalists.
Yeah, sometimes I mean, I don't know how obvious it is to people the kinds of things that you get sent when you're in this world doing this kind of work. I remember back when I was at the student union at Ryerson, which is of course Metropolitan University of Toronto, no, Toronto Metropolitan University. My God, TMU, too much
Mhm.
university. I used to get like handwritten letters in large packages about 9/11 all the
Oh.
time from one guy. And it's like, okay, I'm 20 years old. What am I supposed to do with that? So, yeah. So I like to make sure people understand like what kind of weird risks there are in this job. And one of those risks that you're explaining, you've alluded to, so you cover the far right. Not too surprising that you have found yourself in some trouble. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today was because of not just that trouble, but actually the campaign around what it has shed light on in Alberta as being a problem. So you are part of a campaign with the Canadian Association of Journalists. Tell us a little bit about that campaign.
Right. Yeah. So, we didn't want to just, sort of sit here and sort of, be subjected to legal threats and not do anything about it. So, we teamed up with the Canadian Association of Journalists and other, not just journalists, but also there were academics. There are, digital creators, so podcasters or TikTokers or whatever you want to call them. There are also civil society groups, people who are engaged in advocacy, labor unions, so on and so forth. And so we put together this open letter, which is basically just endorsing the need for anti SLAPP legislation in the province of Alberta specifically. And I mean, there's a number of reasons why we did this. I mean, the first thing is that there is I guess you could say that Alberta has a uniquely litigious political culture that if people aren't really tuned into what's going on in Alberta, they might not realize this. I actually started digging into it and started making a list, and I found over 25 examples of either lawsuits that were filed or pretty public legal threats being made that involved politically connected individuals, and in like 99% of the cases, they were targeting journalists or academics,
Wow.
or even just like random social media users. And this has been a growing issue in Alberta, and it just seems like no one has actually said out loud that this is, clearly something weird is going on here and something should be done about it. So the idea was to put out this open letter. And I think a big goal here is to, establish that there is a wide consensus on this issue. And, I don't think this is like, this really shouldn't be a partisan issue or like left right kind of ideological issue. I mean, I think this should be common sense to everyone that if you are in a democratic society, people who are expressing opinions about matters of public interest should not be subjected to potentially a 10-year multi-million dollar lawsuit just because of one or two words that they may have said.
So you talked about slap suits
Yeah.
and I mean it sounds almost like a comedy thing. What is a slap suit?
So SLAPP is an acronym, and it stands for Strategic Litigation Against Public Participation.
Uh,
And what this means effectively is, so it's any kind of lawsuit that is targeting an expression that is relating to the public interest, basically. So this could take many different forms. I mean, like, I guess the more traditional SLAPP lawsuit is a case where you have like some kind of captain of industry or some sort of very wealthy guy who is suing some activists who are criticizing him, for example. It also involves situations where journalists face some sort of a legal threat or a lawsuit which is designed to prevent them from actually publishing an investigation into the subject of their story. But I think it really comes down to just any kind of lawsuit that is relating to issues of public interest. Because if you look at anti-SLAPP legislation so there's anti-SLAPP legislation currently in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and Manitoba.
hmm.
And I mean, just looking at the Ontario legislation, for example, it's very clear that the goal of this legislation is to protect expressions of public interest and public participation. Because, you know, as a democracy, we are recognizing that this is important. But unfortunately, Alberta does not have anti-SLAPP legislation.
Hmm. Yeah, like, I think back to, like, 20 years ago, it was the first time I was sued, and it was over literally nothing. Like, it was over an article that was ran in the newspaper that I was the editor-in-chief of, the Ryerson Free Press, and it was about a campaign that was happening on campus, and there was a right-wing guy, and we said that he had been seen distributing flyers for the right-wing side, and it was like, "You believe in that side?" Like, there's nothing defamatory about what we've said, about what we have evidence of you having done. And he managed, and he was a lawyer, so obviously he had infinite resources to destroy us, and he ended up shutting down our newspaper. The Ryerson Free Press was just was done after that, and it was really tragic because we were one of the few newspapers in Canada in the campus press that was not geared towards the traditional student body. We were like a mature or continuing education newspaper. We
Hmm.
were monthly, and it was a magazine format. And it was like so stunning to watch this guy make a frivolous claim for money that he wasn't entitled to because there was absolutely no damages to it for
Hmm.
something he supported, knowing that he could just run us ragged. And in our case, which is not the case for you, but in our case, our publisher, which was the student union, the part-time students union at Ryerson, they didn't get it. And so they kind of had our back, but not really. And they didn't really want to go through fighting against this guy.
Hmm.
Ultimately what happened was, he was just running us through the process. And so when we finally were like, "Hey, we got a trial date, we're going to see you in trial, this is happening," he was like, "Oh, emergency baptism for my daughter in Romania, we can't do this." And then before you know it, he was walking away from it, where the agreement was that no confidentiality, and I will never speak good about this person in my life. So we kind of like won, but the newspaper was destroyed over it. And
Mm.
so, in your experience in reading all of the cases that you've seen in Alberta, like, what kind of issues are people being sued over, and what really are the implications for the publications or for the work that those people are doing?
Well, actually, so the example of student newspapers is a really good and interesting one. I mean, there was actually an example of a conservative MP named Carrie Diot who actually sued the Gateway newspaper, which is the student newspaper in, I believe, the
U of
University of
A.
Alberta. Yeah, that's right,
Mm,
University of Alberta. And so if you're a student newspaper, you do not have the resources to respond to this. I mean, often, I mean, these are students who are in their 20s. They do not have, hundreds of thousands of dollars and, 10 plus years to litigate these issues in court. So, I mean, that's definitely, that's just very clearly a problem. Um, in terms of some of the other cases, yeah, I mean, so like we've seen a lot of examples where people connected specifically to the UCP government and Danielle Smith have been at the center of a lot of these. So, I mean, a few years ago, Danielle Smith threatened to sue CBC News over some of their reporting.
sure.
More recently, her former chief of staff filed a lawsuit against the Globe and Mail. There are, one of her organizers threatened to sue, I guess, pretty prominent academic named Dwayne Brott. There's just a whole bunch of these lawsuits. There was another case too where I guess one of Daniel Smith's political allies, he launched a lawsuit against a podcast called The Breakdown. And as a result of this, temporarily, the Breakdown actually had to take down its website and basically shut down. They're back up now, thankfully. But I mean, it just goes to show just how just goes to show kind of like that this is part of the political culture in Alberta. I think when you just look at the pattern here, I mean, I think it is clearly showing that there's um, something uniquely wrong that's happening in Alberta.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's also no shortage of like controversies, right? So every time there's a new controversy, there's a new reason for someone to launch a lawsuit.
Yeah, yeah, sure, yeah.
So you are watching this not just as a passive observer, but you have a SLAPP lawsuit that has been filed against Press Progress. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what it's been like to navigate this. Like, how has it impacted your journalism? How has it impacted your journalists? And, how has it even had impact on the coverage that you have in general?
Yeah. Good questions. I mean, first of all, I mean, just as a small technical point, we wouldn't classify this lawsuit as a slap suit because only a court can make that determination.
Okay.
Obviously, our we would say that our reporting was relating to a matter of public interest, and we would like the opportunity to go to court to make that case, perhaps. But anyways, that being said, how has it had an impact on us? I mean, certainly we recognize that anytime that we write a story about someone in Alberta, this is a potential risk that you could take. So I guess you do have to, it does create a chill in the sense that it makes you ask yourself, like, is this story really worth reporting? Is it really worth
Mm,
going through potentially some ordeal for the next 5, 10 years of your life? And yeah, I mean, that's obviously a problem. I will say that our parent organization, the Broadband Institute, I feel pretty grateful that they have the resources to actually defend these against these kinds of lawsuits, as well too. I mean, in our collective agreement, because we are a unionized newsroom, we actually have protections for our journalists to ensure that if there is a case where there's some sort of lawsuit or whatever, that our legal costs and any damages are covered, so we're not kind of left to ourselves. I mean, you probably know this better than anyone, given your work with freelancers, that this can be a real issue for someone who might be a freelancer, might submit something to a publication, and then they get into one of these situations, and they kind of have to pay for it themselves, right?
mhm. It's a disaster when that
Yeah.
happens. Yeah, I mean, we like the and so in case people don't really understand how this works, so if I wrote an article, that said that Pierre Poilievre, um, like, let me think of the craziest lie, look good on a jet ski, right? Which is
Very
obviously
defamatory.
defamation,
Yeah.
because it's not true. That can that's actually just lying, right? And I get sued, and I publish this, let's say, with Press Progress. The person who sues me for the article can name me, can name Luke as my editor, can name Jim, the guy that was in the room when this all happened, if he wants to, can name the publisher, and can name pretty much anyone that he wants. And it gets, usually the names are in order of implication or importance. And so it usually indicates it's like, well, I made the error, so I'm first. And then it kind of cascades into other people that might be around the person that did the first thing.
Mhm.
And then, then there's the question of, well, who pays for the defense? Because when you're sued, you have no choice but to defend yourself. You can't just say, "Oh, shoot. Yeah, I'll just take that down and I'll apologize." I mean, that is a good thing to do if you're just trying to make it go away. So if you're ever in the situation, you can call me. I can help you through it a little bit in a non-lawyer kind of way. But you don't have any choice but to go through the hoops of filing a defense. And if you are a freelancer, like, sometimes there's contract language that says what happens if there's litigation against an article. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes your articles are changed when your byline's on it, but maybe the piece that's at issue isn't something you even wrote, and you can get hung out to dry. And I don't know if you're seeing this as much as I am, but a lot of freelancers are looking to get now insurance that covers the possibility of legal cases against them. And so it's an added expense on people that already are making no money to buy insurance in case you do find yourself with a defamation lawsuit or something like that, or a libel
Mhm.
lawsuit. So it can be really, really difficult to anticipate this stuff, and then to even properly insulate yourself as you navigate something like this. And I know you said that this shouldn't be a left right issue, but I mean, I don't know many lefties that are suing people that superfluously. The right wing knows that they can use this as a tool, because the second that it happens, you basically are frozen in time and you have to deal with it as it was. And as you say, sometimes you're stuck with this for 5 to 10 years.
And the craziest thing about this too is, 90% of these lawsuits end up, they'll drag out for several years, and then finally, either like as a result of a war of attrition, or, or one of the parties just kind of, losing interest. It will often just get resolved after people have wasted a ton of money on something that ultimately goes nowhere. But in cases where it actually does go to trial, it is very expensive, including with our trial, as we're learning. From what I understand, we are like looking at something like close to $1 million, all things considered, just for
Oh my
defending this
god.
lawsuit. And on top of that, too, I mean, this is, as far as we know, this might be the longest and most expensive media trial in Canadian history. And so it's not just us; it's Press Progress, CBC News, the Toronto Star, and several other defendants. The trial portion went on for about 3.5 months. There was something like 50 witnesses or something that had been called to testify. And I mean, if you haven't gone through this process, you might not be able to process all the different things that are going on here that kind of rack up costs. I mean, we have two very, very good lawyers who are also very kindly giving us a nonprofit discount. But I mean, just the cost for having two top lawyers sit in court for 8 hours a day for 3.5 months. I mean, that adds up. Back at their office, I mean, they have a team of, articling students and other, support staff that are helping them. That's an extra cost. I mean, all the documents that get filed, all that kind of stuff. Ordering transcripts
Mm.
for a day in court is surprise. Well, I mean, maybe it's not that surprising, but it is a pretty. It costs kind of a fortune just to do something as simple as that. And when you start adding all these things up, like you kind of see why these processes get very expensive and out of control very quickly. And I mean, I think this also speaks to another reason why we probably need anti-SLAPP legislation, because I mean, in many cases, I'm speaking more generally here. Um, People are litigating issues that really don't warrant that much. Like, why are we, writing effectively producing as much, text analyzing a allegedly defamatory statement that was posted on Twitter or something. I mean, you're producing the equivalent of like multiple PhD theses, just parsing whatever's going on in this statement. And yeah, you just have to question, like, is this really a good use of the court's time? Is it really a good use of taxpayer money to have a judge, litigating people's tweets and social media beefs, basically? Because in a lot of these cases too, a lot of the lawsuits that we're seeing in Alberta and just more generally of the last several years, it's just people who are suing each other over stuff that someone tweeted or stuff that was
Mm.
written on social media. And I don't know, it kind of begs the question, if we actually want, as a society, do we want the courts to be being the referee for Twitter beefs? And I don't know if that's a good use of everyone's time and money.
Yeah, well, and I guess in the if they had anti-SLAPP legislation, what would happen though, correct me if I got this a
Mhm.
little wrong, but like you receive this lawsuit, you think that it could apply to the standards of a SLAPP lawsuit, and then you would
Mhm.
go to a judge and say, "We believe this is a SLAPP lawsuit, make a determination."
Yeah, that's right. So basically, it's a step that it's basically creating a step in the legal process. So after you've been served the lawsuit, you can go to a judge, basically seeking an anti-SLAPP motion, and and so this gives the court an opportunity at a very early stage before everyone has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on litigating tweets or whatever. It gives them an opportunity early in the process to weigh the merits of the case and also look at the motives of the person bringing the lawsuit.
Mm,
And then there's a test. It's pretty technical, but the gist of it is, first step, the judge will ask, like, is this relating to a matter of like an expression of public interest? So if it's news reporting, if it is someone who is expressing their opinions about politics or their community or whatever, then that would very clearly be a matter of public interest. It would cross that threshold. If it was someone, um, I don't know, spreading like really salacious gossip about someone, that probably wouldn't be something that would have any
mm,
public interest value, so that wouldn't meet that threshold. But if it is something like journalism or someone expressing an opinion about politics or whatever, then the next thing that the court looks at is whether or not there's a defense, like a valid defense. So it's kind of a mini trial that happens, and as long as the defendant can demonstrate that they had a they were acting responsibly. They were, whatever they were saying was rooted in some kind of fact or grounded in some kind of fact. They will, be safe in those situations.
Right, right. Now, are you able to say anything about the case that you guys are involved in?
Saying about it in what sense?
Like, explain was it an article that you folks published, or you said you're involved with other news agencies, and so how did you all get involved in the same suit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess just very generally, this was a story about a candidate for the United Conservative Party in Alberta in the 2019 provincial election. And we broke a story. Press Progress broke a story. I wrote it about a candidate who made comments in on Facebook relating to issues like race and immigration and white supremacist terrorism. The messages were, I think, safe to say, controversial. And as a result of our reporting, this candidate resigned. Jason
Mm.
Kenney, who was the leader of the UCP at the time, actually publicly condemned this candidate's statements. But despite this, several years later, this candidate um, is now suing us for this, as well as the other news organizations that report on it.
Yeah, I mean, that really makes me shake my head because there needs to be the ability to say that people are saying certain things, like giving people the opportunity to respond, allowing them to change their mind. All of that's like important and good, but just thinking about how necessary it is for us to be able to do our jobs and to look and see, oh wow, this person is saying some pretty wild stuff. Like that's in public interest. They're going to be a candidate. Blah blah blah. Like this seems like a real chill on freedom of speech. Frankly, how do you see the already limited freedom of speech that we have in this country? How do you see it getting worse or impacted by this kind of tactic that might be employed against a media organization?
Well, actually, maybe just take a step back and sort of touch on something you said there. I mean, I think the other issue here is, if you are an Albertan who is from a racialized community or some kind of marginalized community, and you read this candidate's statements or similar kind of statements from another candidate, let's say, um, I think you would be very concerned to know that someone like that is in a position where they have the power to pass or repeal laws that could quite literally have a life or death impact on your life, on your family's life, on your children's lives, if they're in charge of the education system, for example. So I think, I think there's like a very, very serious problem here if, you're not allowed to, if we're not allowed to surface these kinds of statements and bring this to the public's attention. In terms of what is the danger of this, I mean, where do I start? News organizations nowadays are facing all kinds of financial pressures. I mean, we're seeing layoffs across the board. The whole, business model for journalism in Canada has basically collapsed. And then on top of that, you're also having to deal with lawsuits that might cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. I just don't know how it is possible to to run a news organization in the year 2026 with these kinds of conditions.
Mm,
So I would say that's one big problem. Additionally too, we are a democracy. I think that we're a democracy, and I think that having this kind of like defamation law that doesn't have any kind of protections built in for public participation, like, not only do I think that's anti-democratic, but I think that actually goes against the values as set out in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I mean, we supposedly have the right to freedom of the press, to free expression. But how can you really say that if anything you say could potentially lead to a 5-10 year legal battle, right?
mhm.
I just think it's inconsistent with our professed values.
Yeah, and then this is where there's an obvious power imbalance because the second
Mhm.
you come from a side that doesn't have the money, that doesn't have access to the lawyers, you can find yourself in a lot of trouble. Like over my career, it's no one's gonna be surprised by the fact that I have lawyers. Like I have a very good lawyer who sometimes sees what I write on Twitter and is like, okay, that's funny, but you got to delete that. And it's like, I hate the fact that I have to delete this joke because it is obviously a joke and you can see it's a joke and I like being funny sometimes. But
There's actually
yeah,
20 lawyers off screen right now who are
like don't say
writing
that.
you notes quietly. Yeah.
Exactly. What the hell are you doing? But as we see a rise in the far right's not like a thing that is nebulous and hard to identify. It's literal people. Like it's
Mhm.
literal people with names, and to imagine that if I was to see someone in Quebec City who was let's say active even in some sort of white supremacist or far right movement, and I report on that all the time. I post things all the time that people publicly say, and why do you do that? Well, you said because it's in the public interest. There's people who are targeted by certain comments that you want to make sure that they get airing so people can say that. But it's also about calling people out and seeing if opinions can change, and seeing if people's ideas can evolve, right? And allowing them to say, wow, I am no longer that person. Although, if they got the Totenkopf tattooed on their chest, don't let them run for your political party, as we've learned in the United States. But like, I really struggle with how on earth we can defend allowing a legal system to permit vexatious complaints like this, right? Because at the end of the day, these are like many of the cases that I have been involved in have been vexatious. And if you look at any complaint system, there's always some level of vexatious complaints. I think like child services is probably the best example of this, where there's like, at least where I am, almost half of the complaints made to child services are vexatious by a neighbor or a parent or someone trying to do harm to somebody. And in the child services world, they have figured out how to navigate that more or less to be able to weed out the vexatious complaints and focus on the ones that really matter. Journalism does feel kind of like the Wild West. Like, we don't really have, I mean, we got professional standards, but there's no professional accreditation, and there's lots of interesting debate about all of that within the journalism world. But because that model had been so strong for so long and the mainstream model collapsed, now it's like, oh my God, anybody can do journalism. And a lot of people are doing journalism in completely alternative ways, but they're completely open to this kind of harassment and this kind of attacks on what they write. Even just this week, I wrote a series on my own Substack. I didn't feel like trying to shop it around to any publications because I was like, I'll just get it out. I'm on vacation. And the number of people have asked me if I've had like legal threats for what I've written is like kind of shocking. How do we undo this problem within society? I mean, you're part of one of the ways of doing that, but like, is there a bigger thing happening here within our culture, within our society, with our economy that is making this an attractive option to people that want to shut down debate?
That's a big question. I think one thing that's going on here, there's probably like 20 different ways I could have just answered this question, but I'll go with this one. I think one thing that's going on here is that, I mean, thinking specifically about how this tends to be kind of a phenomenon that we're seeing more so with the right and like far right kind of thing. So, I mean, obviously in the US, you've got Donald Trump who keeps suing media organizations with these really ridiculous $1 billion lawsuits. Like he's suing the New York Times for $1 billion and the BBC, and then there's all these other lawsuits like CBS and ABC and so on and so forth. Elon Musk, similarly, I mean, he's suing Media Matters over something that they put out about X and how um, it was promoting basically running ads next to like neo-Nazi content or something to that effect. Anyway, so he's pursuing this lawsuit against Media Matters. I think that because the the right has become such an online phenomenon and it is becoming such an international and transnational phenomenon that you are seeing I mean, I think some of it is coming from Trump and Musk and people like that. But I think that, around the world, you're sort of seeing all these right wing actors are kind of taking cues from one another and taking inspiration from one another and sort of trying to learn from each other's playbooks. So I
Mm.
think that's part of what's happening here. I mean, I've personally talked to journalists in Sweden and Germany who've told me stories about sort of similar stuff going on there. I mean, there was apparently there's this Swedish Gen Z influencer who keeps suing journalists, and he's sort of doing it, as far as I understand, for attention and to crowdfund. And that sounds very similar to some stuff that
Wow.
we've seen in Canada with some of the right wing alternative media outlets here. In Germany, also, I mean, there's political figures associated with the Alternative for Deutschland far right party who've been trying to shut down investigative journalists who've done some investigations exposing their ties to some pretty extreme political views.
Mm.
And if you take a step back, I think there is an element of this where it's just that the right has become so terminally online and is also become this kind of transnational movement that they're all just sort of borrowing pages from each other's playbooks effectively. um, One other thing too, I'll say too, because you mentioned this, I guess maybe 5 minutes ago, but you mentioned like there's an element of this that's about calling stuff out. So there's actually an interesting. This actually went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and it involved the I guess the president of the BC Teachers Federation, Glenn Hansman,
Mm.
who was sued by a school trustee in Chilliwack, BC, by the name of Barry Neufeld. And basically, this was a case where Hansman had called out. Actually, he was reacting to a story by PressProgress. Funny enough, so we're kind of involved in this Supreme Court decision indirectly. But so Hansman called out Neufeld, who is just a notorious anti-LGBTQ plus kind of figure, and has a long list of controversial statements that he's made. And yeah, so anyways, in this case, I mean, basically an anti-slap motion was brought forward, and the first judge that heard it, I forget the full details, but basically, the court eventually just decided that actually this should go to trial
Mm.
because they didn't think that there was public interest in what you might call as counter speech. And basically, the Supreme Court ended up recognizing that counter speech actually does have public interest value. So that is kind of interesting how that sort of stuff is actually playing out in how the courts are approaching these issues.
Well, but it makes sense too, right? Because like as much as I sympathize with people that want to just kind of erase some of the most hateful things that people say in society, you have to also attack it. You have to also deal with it. You have to put it somewhere, and it's not as if like we should permit it or whatever, but like I'm not sure if folks have noticed, but like we're kind of losing. we're kind of losing. And in losing, we I think lose the ability to really hammer home why certain ideas are wrong. Like the right has done such a good job in saying like, "Oh, we can't say that this is this anymore because it's because we're not allowed. We're not allowed. We're the ones that are canceled. We're the ones that are oppressed." Even though, you get canceled on the right and you get $2 million, you get canceled on the left and you're literally unemployed. But like if we're not able to actually confront this stuff and interrogate it, engage with it, and not saying everyone has to be able to do that. There is a certain skill set and a certain stomach for all of this stuff, but it's actually really, really important. And if you're trying to engage with this stuff uh, under the threat of being sued, then you're not going to say it at all. Like, I I mean, when I'm thinking right now, like when Shopify was platforming Kanye West's like neo-Nazi stuff and they got majorly called out and it was like, what are you doing? You're platforming Nazis. I mean, I wrote about it and then I was like, oh my God, if I wonder if they would ever come at me and be like, that was a one-off. We've taken it down. You need to remove your article now because that's not true anymore. And
Mhm.
now the leadership of Shopify is like trying to be like, all like we are anti-Semitism. And it's like, are you really? But I have the freedom to do these things because, I mean, what are they gonna take from me? Like, I got nothing left. Most people are not so cavalier. Most news organizations don't have the freedom to be so cavalier. And that's what really worries me is it's like, "Oh, no, no, we're gonna avoid that. We're gonna focus on things that are more safe and that won't get us in trouble," not understanding that actually anything can get you in trouble. People you can sue someone for looking at you the wrong way. And I'm wondering, like, as you've been going through this process and as you've been writing about, other situations and doing lots of research, like, what have you changed not changed your opinion, but has your thinking evolved on all of this stuff, having actually looked at it right in the face than maybe before where you may have been a little bit removed from it?
Well, for one thing, during this podcast, I'm not referencing the statements that this candidate made, which I reported. So self censorship right there.
Mhm.
Um, that being said, I look at something like if you look at something like CBC or CTV or some of these sort of bigger mainstream outlets. If you look at how their coverage, how they cover issues of, for example, racism, or like when someone says something says something controversial, they really understate often what it is that they say, and they don't get into the nuts and bolts of like why it's problematic. And they do that, I think. And some people might look at that and think, like, why is CBC holding back? Like, they should go harder, and maybe they should. But the reason why I think that they do that is because they know that they're exposing themselves to the risk of being sued, especially something like CBC, which kind of has a big target on its back.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's one. Yeah, certainly that's one way you kind of adapt when you kind of are subjected to these kinds of legal threats. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have an audience of folks that are listening and that may or may not have seen any of this already. Like, how do you talk about this to people who are not journalists? What do you think Canadians need to do, or to know, or pay attention to, as frankly as I think we're going to see these kinds of attacks continue to accelerate, unfortunately.
I think for me personally, this is really about democracy. At the end of the day, I mean, I think these kinds of lawsuits are a threat to free and democratic speech in Canada. And if we want to have, and it's not just about journalists. I mean, these kinds of lawsuits impact academics. It impacts labor unions. I mean, just the other day, referencing some reporting from my colleague Emma Arkell, PressProgress's labor reporter. So CUPE is there's a strike between CUPE and Oxfam Canada, and Oxfam actually sent a cease and desist order to CUPE over something that happened. I mean, this is something that affects labor unions too,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they get threatened by lawsuits based on, involving in the strikes that they're involved in, and those kinds of things. But it also impacts digital creators, like podcasters, the TikTokers, the influencers that we've kind of been talking about, and they are actually probably more vulnerable than just about anyone. I mean, even because most freelance journalists are probably at least aware of the risks and might take steps to mitigate it. But I don't know that the average TikToker or I don't know, Twitch streamer or whatever. I don't think they really realize the risk that they take every time that they go on camera for like 3 hours and talk about every issue under the sun. I mean, it's every minute that that goes on is probably increasing the likelihood that someone is going to try to sue them eventually, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of worry about people who are like in those kinds of situations, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like it seems also like the perfect tool to stop just like small town organizing, like as data
Mm.
centers become a much bigger issue, as people try to organize around municipal councils or against their local reeve or something like this. Like it's very easy to scare a citizen movement for anything, by just dropping a lawsuit on them. And I I think of, I'm involved in organizing for the tramway in Quebec City, which is like a very funny story. Um, I mean, it's a very funny issue. In Quebec City, it's not a tramway; it's literally the culture wars for some reason. And I got a legal threat from the Elections Commission because we held an event for the tramway. at the start of the provincial election. And they were like, you're not a third party registered group. You're not allowed to have any political content, which was like totally like, uh, this isn't a provincial issue. It wasn't about the election. Like we were just talking about the
Mm.
tramway because it's just back to school. And oh, yeah, I guess the election period, like the pre writ, we are in the pre writ period. And had we not had lawyers at hand to be like, what the hell are you talking about? This has nothing to do with the provincial election. It's a municipal issue and it's just coincidence. I think that I would have been like, oh my God, I'm not touching this again. Because you get this legal letter from the election commission and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? Right? It can be very, very scary. And so I know certainly when I talk to people, it's like if you get a legal letter and you don't know who to turn to and you don't have a lawyer, like look for people around you who know who've gone through it or who might be able to give you a bit of advice because sometimes, as I say, an apology can make things go away. Sometimes it's totally worth fighting for, and you need to bring together a coalition of people around you to do that work. But I think that that silence is really deadly in all of this and making people feel like they're completely alone.
Mhm.
If you're making content and you're alone and you're talking about politics, like don't be alone. Have those people around you, create that world around you so that if you are attacked, you have people that will have your back. You have people you can get advice from. You might even have contacts that can get you a lawyer if it were to go that far. And to not be afraid necessarily, because while it's a pain in the ass and it sucks and it's expensive or potentially expensive, I mean, we have to resist this because already the attacks on freedom of speech are mounting, and this can't be another one of those things that then we just say, well, I guess it's too dangerous to talk about the government of Danielle Smith. I'm just gonna pay attention to something totally different.
And that's one of the reasons why we put out this open letter. It was because people in Alberta were generally pretty silent about this. I mean, these lawsuits would pop up, people would kind of, get, kind of worked up about for a day or so, and then it would go without any kind of, analysis or reflection on the bigger kind of systemic issue here.
Mm,
And I mean, I think it's fair to say that it's kind of hard to imagine Daniel Smith reacting to an open letter like this by thanking us and telling us, wow, what a great idea, like we'll implement this right away. But for me, I mean, I think a big part of this is I would like to denormalize the idea that there's any legitimacy to slap lawsuits.
mm.
I think that we need to, as a culturally, within our political culture, we need to be talking about this more, and we need to be aware of what it is, why it's problematic. And I think that's what's going to ultimately lead to more changes, just by people talking about it and not, as soon as a lawsuit, as soon as you get, threatened with a lawsuit, just sort of, taking the position that you will invoke your right to remain silent because anything can be used against you in court. And I don't think that's a good strategy when you're dealing with this kind of a phenomenon.
Yeah, off the top of the show, you mentioned a URL. Remind us, where can we find the letter? Can people still sign it? What's the next steps for your campaign?
Yeah, so we host the open letter on a website called antislapalberta.ca. So this contains the letter and the list of co-signers. We're encouraging anyone who is, related to a media organization that has an Alberta focus, any journalists or digital creators that have an Alberta focus, academics, civil society groups, labor unions. If you are falling under any of those umbrellas and you have an Alberta focus, please fill out the form on that website. And for others, I mean, if you've been listening and if you want to do something to help out Press Progress in its legal battle, you can go to journalismdefense.ca, where we are soliciting funds to help pay our legal bills, and we also have a petition for anti-slap legislation there.
Awesome. And that's slap with two P's because,
Two
the second
P's.
silent.
That's right. I have I have no idea where you will go if you go to anti-slap with one p.ca,
Oh,
but
it is. I'm sure it's like some anti-violence. It's
maybe,
like
yeah.
maybe some like karate thing where they're like, "Don't slap people. That's not allowed in this sport." Luke, where can people find your work?
They can find my work at pressprogress.ca. So that's where I do all of my reporting at Press Progress. I'm on Blue Sky. Don't use X anymore. Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky. Find me on Blue Sky, lukeLebrun.ca.
Awesome. Well, it has been such a fun time talking with you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks for giving this issue exposure. I really appreciate it.
All right. I'm going to hit stop record.